guys. Thank you for joining me tonight. In Numbers chapter 13 and 14, we look at the 12 spies that go scope out the land, the promised land that is, Canaan. They go scope out the land and bring back report of everything that was in the land, everything that they experienced, everything that they saw. So they bring back large clusters of grapes. They bring back information as far as the people there. And there is disagreement among the 12 spies. The majority of them, actually 10 of them, were negative. They were fearful. And two of them, specifically Joshua and Caleb, were not fearful, but they were trusting. They were faithful to God's promises. But here's the thing. Some chose to focus on the problems in the land, and others chose to focus on the promise of the land. They chose to focus on God and the things that God had said that he was going to give them in the land. Let me show you here. When these people come back, when these spies come back, they do say that, hey, there are, large, everything is supersized here in the land, and that's good. There's milk and honey, right? Good things. But even though they saw the good things, even though they saw a sort of foretaste of God's promises, they chose to focus on the giants instead, on the obstacles instead of God's promises. But Joshua and Caleb were not looking at the problems. They were looking at God and his promises. Let me show you what it says here in Numbers chapter 14, verse 6 and on. But Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes, and they spoke to all the congregation of the children of Israel, saying, the land we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. Notice that. An exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, then they were looking to God, he will bring us into this land and give it to us. A land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. Their protection has departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. And all the congregation said, to stone them with stones. Now the glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle of meeting before all the children of Israel. And if you continue reading, you can sort of, see the full context of everything that is happening here. These people came back, they focused on the problems, and they started to complain. And that's what happens when we focus on the problems, on the obstacles that are before us, that are sort of in the way of retrieving God's promises, of embracing the things that God has for us. There's always going to be some obstacle, right? The enemy is always going to be prowling like a roaring lion. There's going to be opposition to the things of God. We have to understand that stuff is going to be there. It's going to remain there till the Lord's return, right? Till we actually get to experience, heaven. But here's the thing. These people wanted to get rid. They started to complain. They actually wanted to go back to the world, really Egypt, which is a picture of the world, into bondage. So they started to complain. That was their usual thing. That's what happens when we are fearful. We tend to complain. We tend to blame God and others for our problems, right? Because we fail to focus on God and to focus on his promises. But here we see that Joshua, instead of complaining, instead of being fearful, instead of looking at his own strength, he focused on God and God's promises, right? The Lord is with us. The Lord is going to take care of us, and the Lord is going to get us through whatever it is God has called us into, right? So I want to leave you with that, and I want to encourage you to not just read chapter 14, but chapter 13 here of Numbers as well. And remember this key bit of information here. Fear sees the problems. Faith sees the promises, okay? Fear sees the problems, but faith sees the promises. And know this as well. The children of Israel could have pass by these 40 years of judgment, because the number 40 is symbolic of judgment in the Bible. But they could have bypassed 40 years of wandering in the wilderness if they would have just walked by faith from the get-go, from that first time where the spies scoped out the land, right? If they would have walked by faith, they could have saved themselves 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. But as the story goes, and as we know, they remained 40 years before getting into the promised land. And you know what? Out of that first generation of Israelites that were delivered from Egypt, it was only Joshua and Caleb that made it across into the promised land. All right? So the two guys that were walking by faith here were eventually the two guys that made it over into the promised land 40 years later. But that first generation of unbelief, if you will, of fear, of doubt, needed to die off in the wilderness. And the next generation before them, their offspring, their children, those born in the wilderness, born of faith, if you will, they crossed over into God's promises, into the promised land. And guess what? In the promised land, there was obstacles. There was going to be obstacles, and there was going to be battles to be fought. Yet they continued to win the battles because they focused on God. And if you read Numbers and on, you'll see the times that they lost those battles and suffered the loss of life was because of disobedience to God's word. Okay, so remember that today. Walk by faith and not by sight, and know that fear focuses on the problem, but faith focuses on the promise. God bless you.